Jonah is the perfect biblical example of what we mean about why we must rise in consciousness. As the children's version goes, Jonah is called by God, but initially steps back in fear. A giant fish swallows him for 3 days and then spits him out in Nineveh. He then steps forward in faith, and an entire city of people are saved. He started out unconscious, hesitant and resistant to God's will on his life, but after 3 days, social distancing in the belly of a beast, he awakens, becoming conscious to God's will for his life, and then he follows it. During this pandemic, I've thought a lot about Jonah's story, at least the framework of it. COVID-19 has made me feel like our entire way of being has been swallowed up by a giant global virus. It's forcing us to sit in the belly as we socially distance our way out of this pandemic, waiting for the day it spits us back out into society. And we sit in the belly of this beast and we ponder, what habits are emerging? Are we reverting back to sinful, old, bad, unconscious habits? Are we stepping forward in faith, hoping for a brighter tomorrow? I mean, make no mistake, as Virginia reopens and life resumes, we will be faced with a similar choice as Jonah. Either step forward into something new, something that is soaked in God's grace for all people, or step backwards, returning to old habits and fears. And I'm talking about both of us personally and communally. We are all in the belly of a beast. Becoming conscious of who we are and what comes next will shape who we become as individuals and as a people when this is over. I don't want to oversimplify something that's complex and multifaceted, but seeing where we are right now in light of Jonah, it helps. While he was in the belly of the beast, he was tasked to think deeply on what it means and how it means for him to move forward in faith or move backwards in fear. The same is true for us. To step back in fear would be an unconscious act and a sad one. It would show the world that we were operating out of a belief that what was must be better than what can be. It's fear-based. Now, I understand why people would make this choice, but as your pastor, I'd like to encourage you not to. Don't let what comes after the coronavirus, for us as individuals and as a Christian community, don't let it reverse us back to what was. We must step forward in faith. Plus, the way things were was never God's ultimate desire for humanity. We were always working to improve. The way things were riddled on the fault lines of hate and greed and fear. Going back to those polarities will only create unconscious people and more unconscious churches. We have a chance to build a better world, a bigger world, a better church. And I believe Jonah can help us do that. Jonah was called to help build something better, something more loving. And he'll understand what this looks like if he can consciously step forward onto the shores of Nineveh and follow God in faith. This makes me wonder, what is in God's new post-COVID-19 future for you? What awaits you as an individual? What awaits us as a church? Obviously, we'll all have our own answers based on our own contexts, and our belly of the beast is just different enough. Our understanding of God and faith are just altered enough that we'll need to make room for a lot of different understandings. I'm not suggesting there's a one-size-fits-all answer here, but I think in general, the Spirit is teaching us that national boundaries, identity politics, denominational affiliations, these things aren't going to matter nearly as much as they once did. And identifying each one as a child of God is going to matter a lot more. I know the Spirit is teaching me that we are far more connected, far more alike, far more communal than we are separate, dissimilar, and apart. We all make up the body of Christ, and this pandemic has put a spotlight on how we are all one in the bond of God's love, despite what our politics and theology might say. This was the lesson the Spirit was teaching Jonah. For him to have truly changed, he was going to have to accept the fact that his arch nemesis, Babylon, their capital city, Nineveh, despite their barbaric and sinister ways, were still going to be redeemable for God. That's who he has to go preach to and to save, by the way, his arch enemies, those who have slaughtered his own people. No wonder he struggled with this calling. But as we see in the children's version of this story, he does it. He rises to consciousness and he glimpses God's new future. When we become conscious, we see God's future too, and it includes and embraces and loves all people, even those that we hate. And when we see this, we then see that we can step forward as co-creators to help God form this brave new world. And this is what the church can do post-COVID-19. We offer a redeeming, loving, accepting future. Now, I've said a few times now, in the children's version of this story, I'm using this phrase intentionally. The children's version is clean and straightforward. But on a deeper, more conscious reading of the story, we realize there's actually a lot more complexity in it. In the adult version, Jonah very much struggles to become conscious to what the Spirit is teaching him. He bemoans having to go to Nineveh. He admits he hates the people there. He critiques God's command to save his enemies, but he begrudgingly goes. This is his move towards consciousness, but even after he goes, he immediately reverts back. He pouts under a vine about having to have done what he did. He curses God for taking the vine away. Jonah fights God every step of the way and in every chapter of the story. Go reread it. It's only 4 chapters long. In the adult version of Jonah, he is a very unconscious character who never fully steps into God's abiding grace. And I'll leave you with this thought. Even though Jonah is swallowed up by consciousness, he struggles to learn from it. He struggles to listen to it. He never fully steps into it. And this version of the story is what scares me about when we return to our regularly scheduled lives. Will we be and do the same? Will we become jaded and more unconscious as individuals and as a people? Will we turn our hate towards God and those we don't agree with? When social distancing is all said and done, what will become of us? This is a very important question. I pray as individuals and as a church, we'll learn what Jonah apparently struggled to get, that grace and love pull us forward. God's better future is in front of us, and we can participate in it, help others experience it when we're willing to rise in consciousness.